My name is Lena Bowen. I am 27 years old. I work in healthcare administration, and I found out my family had spent 6 months telling everyone I abandoned my grandmother on the afternoon her hospice nurse walked into the room and handed me a single piece of paper. The nurse's name was Carol. She was a solid, quiet woman who had cared for my grandmother through her last months, and she came to the memorial with a manila envelope and she found me at the back of the room, where I had been placed by my own family's seating choices, and she said, "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you after, not before." She was very specific. Inside was one page. I'll tell you what it said later, because what it said ended the story my family had been telling about me, and you need to understand that story first. My sister Jocelyn is 4 years older than me, and for the last 6 months of our grandmother's life, Jocelyn had been the public face of Nana's care. She organized the schedule. She posted the updates. She sat in the front row of the family meetings and reported on Nana's condition with authority and warmth. She was, to every relative who watched from a distance, the granddaughter who dropped everything. What the family didn't see, what Jocelyn made sure they didn't see, was that for the first year of Nana's decline, before Jocelyn even noticed it was happening, I was the one who was there. I was the one who found her confused in her kitchen. I was the one who drove her to appointments. I was the one who called the doctors, researched the options, filled out the intake forms in my own handwriting. I was there for the invisible, unglamorous first act, the part before anyone was watching, the part that doesn't photograph well for a family group chat. And then the family noticed, and Jocelyn arrived, and everything changed. She didn't push me out dramatically. She managed me out. She took over the coordination, created a schedule, and gradually filled it with herself and people she'd recruited, until the openings that had been mine were gone. When I tried to visit, there was already someone there. When I called, Jocelyn answered Nana's phone and said she was resting. When I asked to be on the care rotation, Jocelyn said the schedule was full, and that I should focus on myself. It was done so gently, so administratively, that by the end I was on the outside of my own grandmother's final months, locked out by the same sister who'd arrived a year after me and called it taking charge. And then, this is the part that still wakes me up, Jocelyn told the family I'd left. That I'd stopped showing up. That I'd abandoned Nana when she needed me most. She said it with sadness, not anger, the way a caring person reports a painful fact about someone they love. And the family, who had not been there for any of it, who had only ever seen the version Jocelyn curated, believed her. I did not correct the record. I have spent my career in healthcare administration watching families fracture at bedsides, and I have learned the most important thing that work teaches. The person who defends themselves in a grief becomes the person the family remembers as disruptive. I stayed quiet. I stayed on the outside, where Jocelyn had put me. I let them believe I'd left. Because my grandmother, from her bed, had already done the one thing that mattered. She'd seen it happening. She'd watched Jocelyn manage me out, and she hadn't been able to stop it. She was too ill, too dependent on the people around her, but she had understood, with the terrible clarity of a dying woman, exactly what was being done and who was doing it. And she had called her nurse, Carol, and she had done the one quiet thing left in her power. She'd signed one page. And she'd asked Carol to hold it until after. Before I tell you what that page said, and what it did to the story my family had spent 6 months believing, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether you've ever been quietly pushed out of the life of someone you loved by someone who needed the credit for being there. I want to see how far this story travels. I have to explain what I do, because it's the whole spine of this story, and it's the exact thing my family found too boring to track. I work in healthcare administration. Not nursing, not doctoring, the administrative side. The intake forms, the insurance questions, the coordination between providers, the paperwork that determines whether a sick person gets the care they need or falls through a crack. It is invisible work. Nobody thanks the person who filled out the intake form correctly. But every nurse and every doctor I've ever worked with will tell you the same thing. The administrative work is what makes the medical work possible, and when the admin falls apart, the patient suffers in ways that have nothing to do with medicine. I learned that in my first week. A woman came in for a procedure she'd waited months for, and it got cancelled at the door because a form was filed with the wrong code, a single wrong number, and she went home without treatment and cried in the parking lot. I found the error, I fixed it, she came back 3 days later and had the procedure, and she never knew my name. That's the job. You protect people from the system's failures, invisibly, and the measure of whether you did it well is that nothing bad happened and nobody noticed. Your best days look like nothing. My family found that impossible to be proud of. My family found this profoundly unimpressive. Jocelyn was a marketing director, title, office, clients. I worked at a health system doing the thing nobody could describe at dinner. My mother introduced Jocelyn as the one in marketing and me as Lena works in healthcare too, sort of on the office side. Sort of. On the office side. As though I were adjacent to the real thing, orbiting it rather than inside it. What none of them understood was that the office side was the reason I recognized what was happening to Nana before anyone else did. Because I spend my days looking at intake forms and care plans and provider schedules, I have a trained eye for the invisible stuff, the early signs, the pattern breaks. The moment when a person's independence starts to slip and nobody around them has named it yet. I saw it in Nana when the family still thought she was just getting older. I saw it because my boring, unimpressive, sort of in healthcare job had taught me exactly what to look for. And I acted on it a year before Jocelyn even registered that something was wrong. I want to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this story. Jocelyn was not a villain. She was a woman who had spent her whole life being the capable, organized, visible one, and when Nana's decline became undeniable, Jocelyn arrived and did what she does best, she organized. She took charge. She built a system. And the system was genuinely good, I won't deny that. The schedule she created, the people she mobilized, the communication she maintained with the family, all of it was real work, and it mattered. What she could not tolerate, what broke something in her, was that someone had already been doing the work before she arrived. That the boring little sister had been there first, quietly, without a system and without a group chat, just sitting in a kitchen with a confused old woman and making sure she ate. Jocelyn couldn't be the one who dropped everything if someone had already been there. So she rewrote the timeline. She pushed me out, took over, and let the family believe she'd been the beginning. There were 3 moments I never let myself feel until Carol handed me that envelope. When I first noticed Nana's confusion and called my mother said, "Oh, she's probably fine, she's just getting older," and told Jocelyn, and Jocelyn said, "Let me look into it," and 3 weeks later started her organized response, and was praised by the whole family for being so proactive, and nobody ever mentioned that the reason she knew was because I'd called. When I drove Nana to her first specialist appointment, alone, and sat in the waiting room for 3 hours, and then told the family what the doctor said, Jocelyn said, "At the next family dinner, I've been researching her condition," as though the information had arrived through her own effort. And when Nana went into hospice and I asked Jocelyn, quietly, on the phone, to please let me be part of the final weeks, Jocelyn said, gently, "I think you should take some space, Lena. You seem really stressed. The schedule is covered." She said it with such warmth that I almost thanked her for benching me from my own grandmother's death. That was the moment I understood the full scope of what Jocelyn was capable of. Not cruelty, she wasn't cruel, not exactly. She was a person who could restructure reality through tone of voice. She'd weaponized warmth. A warm voice saying take some space is how you push someone out of a room and make them feel cared for while they go. It works because the victim in me leaves feeling vaguely grateful, and only understands what happened hours later, driving home, when the gratitude gives way to the slow realization that you've been told, with love in the voice, that you're not welcome at your own grandmother's bedside. I sat at that dinner listening to my sister explain my grandmother's diagnosis to the family using the language from the specialist I had driven Nana to, and I felt something I didn't have a name for yet, not anger, exactly, but the specific grief of watching your own work walk through a room wearing someone else's name. It would happen again and again over the following months, Jocelyn arriving with information I had gathered, decisions I had researched, context I had lived, repackaged as hers. She was not lying. She was simply occupying the space where my work had been, the way a building occupies the land it was built on, and nobody asks the land if it minds. Each moment was warm on the surface. That was the trap of it. Each one let Jocelyn build the version where she was the one who showed up, and I was the one who faded away, until the version was so complete that even the people who should have known better, my mother, my aunts, accepted it without question. Here is what Nana saw, from her bed, that nobody else was looking for. Nana was ill. She was, toward the end, often confused. But she had windows of clarity, sometimes for hours, and her hospice nurse Carol told me afterward that in those windows Nana was sharper than anyone expected, sharp enough to understand exactly what was happening around her, sharp enough to ask questions, sharp enough to keep track of who came and who didn't and who made the decisions about who came. She noticed I'd stopped coming. Of course she noticed. And she asked Carol, one afternoon, why Lena wasn't here. And Carol, who was not a family member and had no stake in the politics, told her the truth, that the schedule was set by Jocelyn, and that Lena was not on it, and that every time Lena had tried to visit, there had been someone already there. Nana was quiet for a long time after that. And then she said, Carol told me this word for word, she said, Lena was the first one here. She was here before any of them knew anything was wrong. And now they've pushed her out and they'll say she left. Carol told me Nana had been keeping track in her head, even on the bad days. She'd ask, is Lena on the schedule today? And Carol would check and say no, and Nana would go quiet. She did that for weeks. A dying woman, tracking her granddaughter's absence, understanding that the absence wasn't choice but structure. She couldn't fight the schedule, she was too ill, too dependent on the people who controlled her days. But she was not too ill to count, and she was not too ill to understand what the count meant, that the person who'd been there first had been systematically removed by the person who'd arrived second, and that nobody outside the room was going to notice. That was the sentence. That was the moment my grandmother, dying, understood the whole architecture of what was being done to me, and decided she would not die without leaving the truth somewhere it could survive. She asked Carol for help. Not medical help, administrative help, the kind I would have given her if I'd been allowed in the room. She wanted to sign something. She wanted it witnessed. She wanted it kept safe, outside the family, with Carol, and given to me after, only after, because she understood that anything she gave me while she was alive would be taken by Jocelyn and reframed as confusion, as medication, as the desperate attachment of a dying woman who didn't know what she was doing. So she signed one page. I need to tell you what the page was, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a legal document in the formal sense. It wasn't a change to the estate that would give me money or property at anyone's expense. What it was something more devastating to my sister's story than any will could have been. It was a handwritten, signed, witness statement, in Nana's own hand, dated, co-signed by Carol as witness, that said the following, and I am telling you this from memory because I have read it 300 times. I, Eleanor Bowen, am writing this in a clear moment with my nurse Carol present. I want to state that my granddaughter Lena was the first person in my family to notice I was ill. She drove me to my first appointment. She filled out my intake forms. She sat with me before anyone else came. For the first year of my illness, Lena was the only one here. She was not thanked. She was not credited. She was pushed out of my care by her sister Jocelyn, who arrived later, took over, and told the family Lena had left. Lena did not leave. Lena was removed. I am too ill to fix this, but I am not too ill to say it, and I am saying it here, in my own handwriting, witnessed by my nurse, so that after I am gone, no one can say Lena abandoned me. She was here first. She was here longest. And she is not here now only because her sister decided there wasn't room. I have read that page 300 times, and every time, the thing that gets me is the handwriting. It's shaky. Nana was ill, her hands weren't steady, but it's deliberate. Every letter is a choice. She could have let it go, could have died letting the story be what Jocelyn made it, and nobody would have blamed a dying woman for not having the energy. But she had the energy. She had exactly enough to write one page, and she spent it on this. Some people leave you money. Some people leave you a house. My grandmother left me the truth, written in a hand that was already failing, timed so it would arrive exactly when I needed it most. Below that, in a different pen, she had added one line, also, the life insurance policy is in Lena's name. I changed it 8 months ago. Jocelyn doesn't know. That last line. I need to sit with it, because it changed everything and it was the one thing I had not expected. The life insurance policy. Nana had held a modest policy for years, not a fortune, but enough to matter, a sum the family knew about and had loosely assumed would be split between the grandchildren. 8 months earlier, during one of her clear windows, Nana had contacted the insurance company and changed the sole beneficiary to me. Not to punish Jocelyn. To protect the one person who had given up a year of her life to be there first, the person who the family was about to spend 6 months calling an abandoner. Nana had, from her bed, with the particular quiet precision of a woman who had watched her own family long enough to know exactly what they would do, placed the one financial asset she controlled entirely in the hands of the granddaughter who was about to be erased, so that when the erasing was complete and the story was set, there would be one fact, one institutional fact, held by an insurance company that doesn't care about family politics, that said, Eleanor Bowen chose Lena. On purpose. While she could. The signed page wasn't a will. It was an explanation. The policy change was the act. Together, they were a dying woman's quiet, precise, irrevocable answer to the story her family was about to tell about the granddaughter who was there first. I want to tell you what I did in the week between Carol handing me that envelope and the family finding out about the policy, because it is the part of this story that tells you who I actually am. I did nothing. I did not call Jocelyn and read the letter. I did not post the statement. I did not contact the aunts who believed I'd abandoned Nana and set the record straight. I held the page, and I grieved, and I let the machinery of the insurance policy do what it was going to do on its own, because the policy change was already filed, already institutional, already outside anyone's ability to reverse or reframe. When the insurance company processed the claim and sent the notification to the named beneficiary, it would be sent to me. And when the family discovered that, they would have questions. And the answers would be in Nana's handwriting, witnessed by Carol, in a page I could produce but would never have to push. I learned that from my job. The administrative record is the truth. You don't need to argue it, or promote it, or defend it. You just need to file it correctly and let the system deliver it. My grandmother had filed herself, her own words, her own signature, her own witnessed statement, in a way that was going to surface on its own, through an insurance company's bureaucratic process, without me ever having to say a word. I want to describe that week, because it was the loneliest and the clearest of my life. I went to work. I filed claims. I processed intakes. I did the boring, invisible, administrative work that I do every day, and I did it knowing that at home, in a drawer, a single page in my grandmother's handwriting was waiting to unwrite 6 months of a story my family had told about me. And I didn't rush it. I didn't need to. Because my grandmother had understood something about me that my family never had, that I am the person who files things correctly and waits for the system to deliver. She'd filed herself, her own words, her own truth, into the one system she trusted me to understand, and she'd trusted me to wait, and I waited, and the system delivered, and Nana was right about me, as she'd been right about everything, right to the end. The family found out 3 weeks later, when the insurance company's letter arrived addressed to me, and Jocelyn, who had assumed the policy was either hers or shared, called me, and her voice had a quality in it I had never heard before, which was genuine bewilderment. "The insurance company says you're the beneficiary," she said. That can't be right. When did she change it? And I said, quietly, 8 months ago. She changed it while she was clear, and she told her nurse, and she left me a letter explaining why. There was a silence. And then Jocelyn said, what letter? And I said the sentence I'd say again exactly the same way. I said, Nana wrote a statement, in her own hand, witnessed by Carol, saying that I was the first person there, that I was pushed out by you, and that I didn't abandon her, I was removed. She left it with Carol because she knew if she gave it to me while she was alive, you'd call it confusion. She waited until after. She wanted the truth to outlive her, and she wanted it in a form you couldn't argue with. Here is where the story becomes a choice, and it is not the choice my family expected. Because I had everything. I had the statement, the policy, the nurse's witness, and a family full of people who had spent 6 months pitying Jocelyn and blaming me. I could have circulated the letter. I could have read it aloud at the next family gathering, the way Jocelyn had narrated my abandonment at hers. I could have posted it. I could have made sure every single person who'd turned away from me at the memorial knew, in the same public way, exactly what had really happened. I thought about it. After 6 months of being the villain in my own family's story, after being benched from my grandmother's death and then blamed for being absent, the pull toward a public correction was real. But I kept asking what I actually needed underneath the anger, and it wasn't 40 people's apology. It was Nana's truth, placed on the record, in her own hand. I already had that. The page existed. The policy existed. Carol existed. The truth was not a matter of opinion anymore, it was a matter of paperwork, and paperwork doesn't need a public reading to be true. Making Jocelyn's humiliation the event would have put me at the center of a spectacle, and spectacles consume the truth they're supposed to serve. I would rather Nana's words sit in a file, quiet and irrefutable, than be performed at a dinner. And there was something else, smaller and more personal. I had watched Jocelyn narrate me out of Nana's life publicly, and I had seen what it did, not just to me but to the truth. The performance replaced the fact, and once that happens, the only way to undo it is with another performance, and the audience is exhausted, and the truth gets lost in the noise of competing shows. I didn't want to compete with Jocelyn on that stage. I wanted the truth to exist in a form that was quieter and more permanent than any family dinner. A filed insurance policy and a witnessed handwritten statement outlast every performance ever given. They're boring. They're administrative. And they're the only things that hold. So I did not circulate the letter. I showed it to Jocelyn, privately, and to my mother, and to Carol, and I let it exist. I let the insurance company deliver the institutional fact. And I let the family do what families do, which is slowly, awkwardly, over months, adjust to a truth that none of them had bothered to check. The 18 months after that were not dramatic. That's the part these stories never show. Jocelyn did not apologize quickly. She apologized in pieces, over months, the way a person disassembles a story they've been living inside. First she acknowledged the schedule, that she'd structured me out, though she framed it as trying to keep things organized. Then she acknowledged the narrative, that she'd told the family I'd left, though she framed it as what it looked like from where I was standing. And finally, about a year in, she called me, and she said, I need to say something without framing it. And she said, you were there first. I took it from you. And then I told everyone you were the one who left. I did that because I couldn't stand that you'd been there before me, and I'm sorry, and I don't know how to make it right. She didn't ask me to forgive her. That's the only reason it landed. My mother took the longest, because she had the most to unbuild, years of introducing Jocelyn as the capable one and me as sort of on the office side. One Sunday she said, I should have visited more. If I'd been there, I would have seen you were the one there first. And I said, yes. And she said, I let Jocelyn tell me what was happening instead of looking. And I said, yes. And she didn't have a third sentence, because sometimes 2 true things are enough. She asks about my work now, my mother. Real questions, specific ones, the kind you ask someone you've decided actually does something that matters. She asked me once what the hardest part of my job is, and I told her the truth. The hardest part is when a patient's family doesn't understand why the paperwork matters, and the patient suffers for it, and no one blames the missing form. They blame the nurse or the doctor or God. She was quiet, and then she said, "That's what Nana's page was. The paperwork that mattered." And I said yes. And she understood, for the first time, that what I do for strangers every day is the same thing my grandmother did for me once, from her deathbed, with her last energy, put the truth in writing so it survives the people who'd rather it didn't. There was one afternoon, about 8 months after, that told me the story was truly over. I was at Nana's house, we were getting ready to sell it, doing the slow sad work of emptying a person's life into boxes, and Jocelyn was there, and we were in the kitchen, and she found, in a drawer, the intake forms I'd filled out for Nana's first specialist appointment. My handwriting, dated, from more than a year before Jocelyn had even known anything was wrong. She held them a long time. Then she said, "These are yours." And I said yes. And she said, "You filled these out before I even," and she didn't finish. She put them down on the counter and stood there holding paper evidence, in her own hands, that the sister she'd called an abandoner had been doing the admin that kept Nana in the system a full year before Jocelyn arrived to take charge. She didn't apologize in that moment. She just stood there, holding my forms, and let the fact of them sit. Carol, the nurse, came to see me once, a few months after. She said my grandmother had been calm the day she'd signed the page, not upset, not confused, not raging against what was happening. Just clear, and precise, and certain. She said Nana had said, while signing, "Lena will know what to do with this. She's the one who does the paperwork." And I laughed, because that was my grandmother, reducing the most important act of her final months to the paperwork, the way my whole family reduced what I do to the office side. She saw me. Even dying, even managed, even locked away from me by her own granddaughter's schedule, she saw me the whole time. People ask me whether it was revenge. I didn't push anyone out. I didn't take over anyone's schedule, or narrate anyone's absence to a room full of relatives, or stand at a memorial and tell the family someone had abandoned the person they loved. I didn't do a single one of the things that made the consequences arrive. Jocelyn did the managing out, her own story did the damage, and a dying woman's signed page, held by a nurse, did what no argument of mine ever could have. All I did was be there first, and keep the record, and sit still when the record was handed to me. That's what I do. That's what my boring, unimpressive, sort of on the office side job taught me, that the administrative truth is the only truth that survives a family, and that the person who files it correctly doesn't need to shout. Here is what everybody lost. Jocelyn lost the story, the one where she was the granddaughter who dropped everything, the one who organized the care, the one the family praised. She lost it to a single page in Nana's handwriting, witnessed by the one person who'd been in the room more than anyone, the nurse. But she gained, eventually, the ability to say a true sentence to me without a frame around it, and that's more than she'd ever done before. My mother lost the tidy version of her daughters, and she's still adjusting, slowly, honestly, to the fact that the daughter she'd called sort of on the office side was the one who'd been on the patient's side the entire time. And I lost something too, and it wasn't Jocelyn. I lost the belief that being there first would be enough, that the year I gave, the intake forms, the specialist appointments, the mornings in a kitchen with a confused woman I loved, would speak for itself. It didn't. Presence is not enough. The record is what holds. I learned that from my job, and then my grandmother taught it to me one more time, from her deathbed, in her own handwriting. I keep that page framed on my desk now. Not the insurance policy, that's filed where it belongs. The page. One sheet, Nana's handwriting, Carol's witness signature, dated. Because that page is the thing that was actually true. My family could tell each other I left. They could seat me at the back of the memorial. They could believe the organized sister over the one who was there first. They could not, in the end, argue with a dying woman's handwriting and the nurse who watched her sign it. They said I abandoned her when she needed me most. It turned out she knew exactly who was there, and who wasn't, and she wrote it down before she couldn't, and gave it to the one person outside the family she trusted to hold the truth until the noise was over. So if there's someone in your life who showed up first, quietly, before anyone was watching, and then got pushed out by someone who arrived later and louder and took the credit, ask yourself one thing tonight. Who was actually there? Not who organized the schedule. Not who posted the updates. Not who stood at the front of the memorial looking like the devoted one. Who was there first, in the kitchen, at the appointment, in the middle of the night? Because the person who was there first almost never gets to tell their own story. Someone louder always tells it for them. And if you're lucky, if you're as lucky as I was, the person who saw everything finds a way to write it down before it's too late. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Every character and event in it is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment. But if any of it felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with this: be there first, and keep the record. Not because you expect to be erased, but because the truth, in the right handwriting, is the most powerful thing a person who loves you can leave behind. It outlasts the noise. It outlasts the story. It holds.